exemption for law enforcement records. Have y'all, I'm sure you have, police body cams.
Yeah, so,
The city of Pullman and apparently other Washington cities have been hit with requests for all police body cam videos that ever been made. And they're looking at that thinking, what are we gonna do with this? So
Yep.
where's the state of Idaho on that?
so where the state of Idaho is, I take you all the way back to the definition of writing. Any means of recording. And so the fact that you've got a body cam that's shooting video means you have a recording.
Okay.
That's a public record. Now the next question is, does an exemption apply to it? And so for a lot of the police officer recordings, you're probably going to have some sort of active investigatory record. Meaning, you know, is it going to prejudice somebody from the right to a fair trial? Is it going to constitute an unwarranted invasion of privacy? There's a whole laundry list of factors to consider when you're evaluating those. And so a lot of the body cam stuff you probably won't be able to get right away because of that active investigatory record or one of those other factors that comes into it. Now, there's also going to be stuff that absolutely is a public record and there's no exemption that applies. The tough part on that, and you know, when I think about the Pullman request, assuming it's the way that you proposed it,
Oh, I didn't
that's going to be
propose,
expensive.
I took it out of some local
Sure,
newspaper.
sure, sure. But assuming that they've asked for any and all body camera footage for time immemorial.
They want to put it on YouTube, what they want to do with it.
Yeah.
Well, actually, if I could
Yeah.
add,
And that's going to be expensive.
well, I think there's something in the, that's different between Washington and Idaho here. As I understand, these requests in the state of Washington have been anonymous requests demanding that the public agency put all that body camera up on, recording up on YouTube.
Something
In
like
Idaho,
that.
we don't have anonymous public records requests. You can be required to give your name and address.
And I wonder if Washington has any type of payment statute like we have in Idaho.
Good
Because,
question.
I mean, the newspaper reports are that these people over in Washington, the city of Palouse, plague-bombed, Pullman, and they're all talking about how many people they've got to hire to do this, and wondering how are we
Right,
supposed to
and-
accomplish it.
and if it's an anonymous request, to whom would they send the bill? It kind of doesn't make sense to me. It's a very odd approach. I have heard some people say, oh, because of this, we ought to exempt body cam footage in Idaho from the public records law. I don't think so. I think that it's a very legitimate form of news gathering, and heck, what would we see on the nightly news if we couldn't see police video every now and then when something happens in our
But-
community?
As a city council member, I'm anticipating sometime in the future a budget request to buy body cams for the Moscow City Police Department. I would be very concerned about the answers to this type of question, even though I'm probably a firm believer in body cams. I don't want to get us into some kind of quagmire over the product.
Well, the answer in Idaho is probably every time you get a request, you're going to have to analyze it for, number one, is it an active investigatory record? Is there some sort of exemption that applies to it? And then number two, you're going to have a volume issue based on the number of amount of body cam footage that you have, the fact that it's got to be reviewed, and then how you reproduce that. Those are all going to be part of the equation. In good news, Idaho allows you to make a request to narrow. You know, are you looking for a specific date? Is there a specific incident that you're interested in? Which may be of assistance in those circumstances.
You already, sorry.
Washington rules do have, or do provide for both a fee schedule and a time schedule. So you can't, like we had earlier, walk in and say, I want it now. They have a right to say, you'll get more information and then say, okay, that many pages will cost
Right.
X dollars. Very similar, I think, to what our federal courts have here in Idaho.
So the law in Idaho is you have 3 days to
Yeah.
respond. You can get 10 days. And I think it's really important that you focus on the fact that this is in Idaho and the Idaho law will apply to it. And let Washington do whatever it's going to do. Let's focus on the fact that Idaho's got a good system. There's an orderly process to deal with it. And I think, you know, to me, one of the issues that you've got is to be, not just take everything that you hear and say, oh, that's going to ruin the system in Idaho. let the system work. It works. It's worked for, this is the 25th year of the public records law in Idaho.
I get it, but the reason for asking you the question is because you work for Idaho.
Yeah, and in Idaho, I think that the law addresses it fairly straightforward. Yes, sir.
There are already a lot of body cams and dash cams and
Yeah,
other
they're out
recordings already that the city of Moscow is using, so I don't know.
We don't have any
Yeah.
body cams to my knowledge.
There's a lot of,
I'm sure
I
that's
know
true.
that there are dash cams, and I know that there are other cities
I think we do have
dealing
some
with
dash
these
cams.
requests already.
Dash cams, I'm pretty sure I've
That-
seen
That's for
body
the city
cams.
council to meet elsewhere.
And dash cams and body cams is going to be the same analysis. That is, first of all, it's a public record. Second is, it's subject to disclosure unless it is exempted. And maybe it's an investigatory record, maybe it's not. Maybe I'm just an officer walking down the street and I didn't do anything and it's not part of an investigation. That can be disclosed. So we can't answer all of those questions, and we really can't answer the questions for Washington.
But I would add that I personally requested a dash cam video from the Idaho State Police last year, and I received it, and I paid the fee, and I got it on a DVD or a CD, and I sent it to my Spokane office, and they processed it and put it up online, and it was really important to the story that I was writing, which was about whether or not ISP had properly stopped and searched someone for, alleging that they had marijuana simply because they had Washington or Colorado license plates, and those people had then filed a lawsuit. And the video was fascinating, and it was important to news gathering, and it was important that people could see it, and it was not that hard to do, and it didn't take them that long to supply it.
So that's body cams. Solved. Case closed. Mischief managed.
Almost done.
9-340C, personnel records and professional discipline. And again, in 9-340C, it's very specific as to what those exemptions apply to. And so, for example, a question we get is salary information a public record in Idaho? Yes. If you work for the government, your salary is a public record. And there, believe it or not, nowadays there are a bunch of different websites that have it all put up there, including the state. The state controller's office has a website that you can look up everybody's salary on if you need a way to figure out what everybody's making. 9-340D, trade secrets. And I put this one up there because it's one of those issues that with government, a lot of times you're getting requests for proposal or requests for information or inquiries, and folks have trade secrets that they submit or proprietary information. If you think that you're in that process, ask for those folks to identify what that information is and separate it from the rest of it. That way, in case you get a public records request, you can immediately say, okay, this is the stuff they designated as a trade secret. One of the things we also do at the state level is if we get a public records request, we actually say to them, we plan on producing this information. If you have a problem with it, it's up to you to do something so that it's not produced. And that puts it on them, and that way you're not, as a government, in the position of trying to guess what the information is or to guess why that information is a trade secret. Archaeological and endangered species records.
Ron, I've got to interrupt you over bids.
Yep.
Bids are required to be read out loud publicly.
Right, but until they're open, they're exempt from disclosure.
Until they're open, they're exempt from the people asking for them to look at them.
Well, you still need an exemption. The draft legislation, that again is a very limited exemption that's only until it's printed in committee. Once it's printed, that exemption actually lifts off of there.
And that is only the legislature, that does not apply to local government.
Say again?
The draft legislation exemption does not apply to local government.
Only
It's
to the
specific
legislature.
to the legislature.
Gotcha.
There's also access to exempt records, and so if you've got a record about yourself, you actually have the ability to get more information. So information that would otherwise be exempt from disclosure, you can actually get access to. Again, there are limitations to that. And so, for example, if you're the target of an investigation, you can't make a public records request for the investigation file about you. Yes, ma'am?
Would this cover guardian to minor? A guardian could obtain the records about a minor?
Yes.
Okay.
And again, there's a whole process for how that works. As I said before, the sole remedy under the Public Records Act is a civil lawsuit seeking the documents to compel the agency. When you go to court, the court reviews the documents in camera, which means just the judge looks at them. A couple of things here. Number one, if you have a public records request and you have documents, you have to submit the documents to the court for them to review it. There was
like that, Brian?
Yeah, there was a case in southeastern Idaho where the attorney showed up to court to argue, but never submitted the documents to the judge for the judge to review. That was a very confrontational hearing. I'll just summarize it as that. And you can imagine who did the confronting. It was the judge. But the other thing that's important to understand is that when you see this term show cause, that means the burden within that case is on the government. The government has to show cause, meaning how this exemption applies to those documents to the judge. And again, that's a point that was really reinforced within the Wade versus Taylor case that came out last March. And then the court can order the public official to make the disclosure if the reason isn't justified. So if the court looks at it and says, look, I don't agree with your claiming that exemption, they order the documents released at that point. There is a bad faith penalty under the law. The bad faith penalty is it can be a fine of up to $1,000 in addition to attorney's fees. So if you get taken to court and the citizen wins, they can have their attorney fees paid for plus a $1,000 fine. A couple of things that kind of trigger bad faith penalties. Number one, no response. So if you just don't respond, that's probably a bad faith penalty. If you don't take the documents to court, submit the documents to court, that might be a bad faith penalty. If you don't cite an exemption in your denial, that could be a bad faith penalty. But if you make a mistake and release documents that probably were exempt from disclosure and should not have been released, you have immunity as long as you did it in good faith. And so if you make a mistake because you're trying to comply with the act, you're not going to be penalized. There is a prohibition on mailing lists, and so you can ask somebody, do you intend to use this as a mailing list? If they say yes, you can deny the request on that basis. But folks can also create their own mailing list from a collection of public documents, and so it's a very fine line with the mailing list prohibition. They can't expressly ask for the list, but they can create their own list. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, recognizing the public records law has over 100 exemptions. We've already gone on for quite a while. I think you guys would probably riot if I started trying to read all of the exemptions or go through them all with you. Yes, sir?
If you're working as a government official, do you have right to the access to the documents you're working with if you leave your work? Can you just take them all with you? Copies of them?
So that would be a public records request. If the records are exempt from disclosure, those exemptions would apply.
But if you would have to make the request.
Yep, you would have to make the request. And believe it or not, there's actually a set of criminal statutes for altering and taking public documents, and that's in, I think, 1832. If I remember correctly. There's a whole series of statutes in that chapter dealing with what I would call kind of public records fraud and destruction and misuse and those sorts of things. Other questions? I think I wore you all out.
You answered them. Thank you.
You're brilliant. There you go. Brian.
Very quickly, I would like to call up the actors for our final, very, very short scene, which is called
Nothing wrong with being short.
Putting It All Together. J.Q. Public will be portrayed by Ivan Nelson of the Latah Library Board. Helpful the Clerk by Shannon Quinn, Daily News Education Reporter. Come on up, actors. And before you leave tonight, please remember, fill out your evaluation. This is important to our grant funders. I will lend you a pen if you need one. I will even lend you Brian's pen. But fill it out, please, and leave it on the table before you leave. So, here we we are at our final scene, where we meet JQ Public. JQ, please wave to the audience. And our old friend, Helpful Clerk, who during the course of this workshop inexplicably left the city and is now working for the school district. Helpful, please wave at the audience. And JQ stops in to make a public records request.
Good morning, School District Office. How may I help you?
Hello, this is JQ Public. I'm working on a PTO, Parent Teacher Association, Organization, project. Could I please get a copy of the agenda for this week's school board meeting?
Well, of course. Would you like to pick it up, or can I email or mail it to you?
I could pick it up this afternoon. Could I also get a copy of last week's minutes and a copy of the 2003-2004 budget?
Absolutely. I'll have them ready for you at 1 o'clock. Last week's financial audit is available. Would you like a copy of that too?
Wow, thank you very much. I think the audit report would be very helpful. Actually, yes, it would be. How much do I owe the school district?
You really aren't asking for very much, so there won't be any fees. See you at 1 o'clock.
Thanks a lot.
All right, well done. All right, well, that's the way it's supposed to work. Agendas, minutes, budgets, audits should be routinely released. That goes for schools, cities, counties, mosquito abatement districts, and even the super secret Gopher District budget. So there we go. Thank you very much for being here tonight.